Is Penn State going to do in 2025 what Ohio State did in 2024? Well, it looks like from what they are doing, is Penn State going to do in 2025 what Ohio State managed to accomplish in 2024? What's up, kinfolk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a step mill. If this is your first time watching the #1 college football show, welcome. Thank you for joining us here. We talk college football 24/7, 365. And please consider joining our community. It's 130,000 folks and growing. And hit that subscribe button if you like what you see. If you're a returning viewer and you haven't hit that subscribe button, I'm going to ask you to do that. Doesn't cost anything. It's free. It's like a follow button on Instagram or X or TikTok. Just lets YouTube know you like what we're doing here. And answer the question for me in the comments below where we all talk. Do you think Penn State is going to do in 2025 what Ohio State managed to accomplish in 2024? And by that, I mean win the national championship. One of the reasons that we are talking about this right now is because Penn State made what I think is the most significant move at the coordinator position across the country. They saw what Jim Knowles was able to accomplish at Ohio State as defense coordinator and saw him help lead that team to its first national championship in 10 years and decided, hey, we're going to use a loss as an opportunity to get better. So before hiring Jim Knowles to this position, Penn State got way out in front and told everybody, we've already signed up our players for next year that are going to be the core of our 2025 team, who were the core of our 2024 team and got us to the college football playoff semifinals. This is them acknowledging that they are just got to be better in the margins, very small margins here and there that might get them to that next win that gets them to play for the title, that gets them an opportunity to win it. They re-signed Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. They re-signed Dennis Sutton. They have what they think is the great offensive coordinator that they need in Andy Kotelnicki. And when Tom Allen decided to leave Penn State as defensive coordinator to go to Clemson, there was an open conversation about who would fill that spot. And the late horse ended up winning the race. The horse race that was Jim Knowles staying at Ohio State, Jim Knowles perhaps leaving Ohio State to go to Oklahoma, and then Penn State threw down a marker. One of the things that they capitalized on was, yeah, he wants to coach at Penn State. I still think that a 3-hour drive is a 3-hour drive, but when you hear Jim Knowles say, hey, I grew up a Penn State fan, and everything was about Penn State, and he opens many of his comments by saying, I couldn't get there as a player, so now I'm going to take this opportunity to get there as a coach. You believe him. But I don't believe that as much as I believe that being the highest paid coordinator in the entire sport, being the highest paid coordinator in history, had everything to do with this as well. Now, it wasn't as if Ohio State was not prepared to do the same and Oklahoma was not prepared to do the same. Any contract that Jim Knowles was going to sign was going to make him the highest paid coordinator in his position. And frankly, was probably going to make him the highest paid coordinator, period, in the history of the sport. We've been playing college football for 156 years now and counting. So $3.1 million to get Jim Knowles to just be the defensive coordinator. He does not have a position coach title. They have a vacancy at the linebacker position, and it sounds like Dan Connor's going to take into that. And my goodness, you could do a whole lot worse than Dan Connor's coaching linebackers. It's like James Laurinaitis at Ohio State. It's fun, man. When I get to talk about some of these dudes that were physical freaks and guys that I just could not be on a football field with and hold my own, it is so gratifying. Like G.J. Kinney being head coach of Texas State, Brennan Marion being head coach of Sacramento State. I watched both of those guys play at the University of Tulsa. G.J. who could spin it like y'all wouldn't believe, and Brennan who would have been, I think, the best wide receiver in the sport for his junior year if he didn't blow out his knee. Like it was that. Like those guys were them. Dan Connor's one of those. Paul Polesny is another one of those guys that comes to my mind when I think of Penn Staters. And, LeVar Arrington, Micah Parsons, and here of late, Abdul Carter. You're going to have guys that know how to coach their positions. You're going to get back a ton. And you realize that you're in your window. You're in your window because there's this thing called the 12-team playoff for which Penn State made the playoff for the first time in its history and probably does not necessarily make this particular 4-team format if it is one. I realize that they were ranked at number 4, but when you're looking at resumes and you're looking at who you would want to have into this thing, are you going to put them in over a couple of other teams that may or may not have shown you a little bit more to get into the playoff, like, say, Arizona State, for instance, or maybe even Boise State, who they ended up beating up on in the Fiesta Bowl? There's a couple of things that I think impede me and some others from being all on board with Penn State being that team to beat in 2025. One of those is, Ohio State is right there, and they're defending national champions, and they feel really good about the prospect of perhaps hiring from within or getting someone that they would like to coach the defense. And then there's this ongoing discussion around what Chip Kelly may or may not do going back to the NFL, but the parts are there, right? Julian Sand is probably going to be that guy for you. Jim Knowles apparently butted heads with Larry Johnson Sr. and probably Ryan Day, depending on what scuttle you want to hear. But again, $3.1 million is more than $2.75 million is more than $3 million. 3 being, I think, Oklahoma, 2.75 being what was written down and given to the Columbus Dispatch to scoop for Ohio State, and then the 3.1 from Penn State. Now, you have to deal with Drew Aller, who I still think hasn't beaten anybody that we care about. Quarterbacks wins is not necessarily a stat that people want to focus on, but I focus on it because you always want to be able to point to, when did this guy go get you a W against an opponent we think that you have an opportunity to play on par with and beat? Say Ohio State, say Oregon. They haven't done that, right? Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl is the biggest win of Drew Aller's career. That's it. I don't think that's a huge win. I wouldn't count that one. Had they beaten Notre Dame, that would have been a huge win. But really, the game didn't end when Mitch Jeter hit the field goal. The game ended when Drew Aller threw the pick. Like, that was it. All you had to do was not throw that interception. Drew Aller's got to get past that. They want him back. He wants to come back. He wants to run it back. So there's one. 2 is James Franklin's got to be a head coach that can beat a top 5 team. Like, I got a hard time putting Penn State inside of the top 5 for that reason. When it comes time to play a team ranked 4th, ranked 3rd, ranked 2nd, ranked 1st, yeah, you're probably going to pick against them, because the only head coach who's had 20 or more chances to beat top 5 teams with a worse record is Frank Beamer. And that was when he was coaching at Virginia Tech. When you could do that, you could lose to Florida State, you could lose to Miami, and you could still be one of the best teams in college football playing in a New Year's Six game bowl game or in the national championship. Now that the calculus on getting to the national championship has changed and the emphasis has been taken off of playing in a bowl game, let alone a New Year's Six bowl game, because they rotate, you can't be the guy who loses to Ohio State, who loses to Oregon, who loses to Notre Dame. You have to be the guy that can beat them. And that is going to be the plateau. Like, I think of what Penn State is doing as a guy that just can't hit 315. You ever put 315 down on your chest and you see that somebody needs a spot? It's different than 305. It's different than 310. For whatever reason, getting past that sticking point has been just the biggest burden for for Penn State. And I think until they show us that they can push through that sticking point, we're going to be here. Man, I'm taking it back to being powerlifting. I won a national championship in powerlifting. I used to be about 50 pounds heavier, like literally, and then my knees just couldn't take it anymore. So forgive me if I fall back into weight training as a mode, but my joints and whatnot, just I was punishing them when I was 18, 19, 20, 22 years old, man. So that 315 is just, it's like putting 405 on your back for the first time. It just feels different. And you know that you need to be able to get up out this hole. Otherwise, everybody around you in Summer Pride's going to just be giving you hell, but they're not trying to. They're always trying to pump you up. And you always got coach right there behind you ready to pick you up by the chest if something should fail. But 405, 315, those are just numbers that stick for me. And as far as, can you come out and play? Can you lift this weight? That's where Penn State is. But everybody else, they should beat up on. That's just what it is. They should beat up on literally everybody else. The only teams that give them hell are the teams that play for national championships, right? Notre Dame breaking through that plateau, getting to the national championship game, making the playoff for the first time as an at-large team, and looking better than the last time they played in a national championship game. Ended up being a beat down late, but they was rolling there to start. Didn't look like the 2012 national championship is what I'm saying. So you bring in Jim Knowles to try to help get you further over the top and to solidify a part of your scheme that really was great last year. And that's what Penn State wants to do. They want to do what Notre Dame does. They want to know what Jim Harbaugh and Sharon Moore do. They want to be able to run the football and stop you doing anything else you want to do, be takeaway monsters on defense. Again, I think it's got to come down to a quarterback that can go get you a bucket, can go make a play. That was the difference between, I think, Notre Dame and Penn State. Riley Leonard could go make a play. He'd get you a bucket. Will Howard at Ohio State, he could go make a play. He'd get you a bucket. I didn't see Drew Aller being that guy who could get the offense started in the pass game to let Nick Singleton and Katron Allen eat. In a year where you had Tyler Warren, man, in a year where you had Trey Wallace, you had dudes. I think they're going to solidify that wide receiving core, but again, it's got to do with the service. I think that they got guys over there that can catch the rock. I also find it interesting that we're in a spot where Jim Knowles becomes the guy that people are chasing, basically because of the way things shake out and the way that, the season went. I'm not certain that Penn State or Oklahoma or Ohio State would be doing themselves a service by adding Jim Knowles. You'd want to have him, but all of those teams have things you were more worried about on the offensive side of the ball. Oklahoma, that's another starter, right? Penn State, Drew Aller, I just mentioned that. And at Ohio State, you're young. You got Julian Sayin back there. You're losing Travion Henderson and Quinshawn Judkins, and you're going to rely a ton on Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, and Brandon Ennis with Emeka Ibuka gone. But, Brian Hartline is the best at what he does, coaching wide receivers. Also stands make a point here. Two of the best position coaches, regardless of position in football, are at Ohio State. Coaching defensive line, Larry Johnson Sr., coaching wide receivers, and Brian Hartline. Who is that guy at Penn State right now? Who would you point to? That's another thing that I think you got to take into account. So, wanted to talk a little bit about that because it is an historic number, but Penn State's going to have to show me against some class competition 2025 they can push through that plateau before I start saying they can win the national championship.